You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Great Plains Archaeology Podcast. Join me as we uncover the rich histories of North America's Great Plains, exploring the latest archaeological discoveries and past cultures that shape this storied region. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to episode 21 of the Great Plains Archaeology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carlton Shield Chief Gover, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this exciting journey through the rich and fascinating histories of North America's Great Plains. Today, we got another special guest. We have Tyrel Iron Eyes. Tyrel is the tribal archaeologist for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and as well as a photographer. Thank you so much for being on, Tyrel. I'm looking forward to this, man. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm honored that you asked me to be here, and hopefully I'm able to answer your questions.
I think it'll be a good time. I was definitely bummed to hear that you and a bunch of other folks were not able to make it down to SAA's, the Society for American Archaeology Conference in Denver this year due to some fun budget restructuring at the federal level.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to it, really excited to go, and then got told right before I was supposed to leave, like the week before, that unfortunately our travel was getting cut or being restricted, at least for the time being.
That's a bummer. So for the audience, I've talked about TIPOs before. I've talked about NAGPRA officers. For those that have listened to the Life in Ruins podcast, we had a number of TIPOs and NAGPRA officers on there as well. I think, and don't hold me to this, you might be the first tribal archaeologist that I have interviewed who is employed as an archaeologist by a tribe. So what does it mean to be a tribal archaeologist at Standing Rock?
So what I always tell people, that I lean heavy on the tribal part of my job, of my title. Like I was educated as an archaeologist. I know how that realm works. I know how that sphere works. But my job is to interface with archaeologists, archaeology, to provide that expertise while also advocating for the tribal voice, for a tribal narrative. So the whole reason that I wound up in this position was, if you go and look at a lot of the literature on Native people, up until quite recently, that literature was all by non-natives, by people outside of those communities. And even today, like, that still happens with a lot of Class 3 reports. And it's the nature of the game. There's not a lot of Native archaeologists. There's more every year. But my role is to allow us control of that narrative again.
Sweet. That's awesome, man. So what do your day-to-day responsibilities look like? When you walk into the office, what is it you're up to?
God, I wish I had like bullet points for you, but it's so different every single day I walk in. Some days it's going through the mail and reading proposed actions, doing all like the Section 106 stuff, reviewing the reports that were sent to either concur or request clarification or just outright push back, depending on what it is. Some days I get to the office and there's a note saying that I have to travel to the other side of the reservation. So my office is at our tribal headquarters, which is in Fort Yates, North Dakota. It's on the north half of Standing Rock. Our reservation is unique in the fact that we straddle the state line. So the north half of Standing Rock is in North Dakota. The southern half is in South Dakota. And I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it's a couple million acres and we have tribal land throughout all of it. And so sometimes I'll be in Fort Yates and I get a call and it's, hey, someone has a concern down by Watauga. Someone has a concern over by Thunderhawk, which are small towns, like the far-flung corners of the reservation. No one has asked me to go to Trail City, which is like as close to Cheyenne River, which is like our southern neighbor, as you can get without leaving the res. But I know that day's coming and I am terrified because that's like a 2-hour drive.
Fair enough, man. So, like, how is the program, the tribal archaeology program, structured within Standing Rock? So, do you report to a TIPO or NAGPRA officer or a cultural director? Who is it you're working with and reporting to?
So, I report to the TIPO. I report to the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. I work within the Historic Preservation Office itself. And I'm sure I'm going to be reiterating what other TIPOs have said, where the vast majority of us are underfunded and understaffed. Right now, our entire office, the entire Tribal Historic Preservation Office for Standing Rock, is 2 people. It's myself and my boss. And we're responsible not just for the lands within the reservation, but also for ancestral lands and reviewing all of those projects. I sit in the middle of our overall hierarchy, where I report directly to the TIPO, and then I'm also in charge of our monitoring program, training up tribal cultural specialists or traditional cultural specialists. The acronym is TCS, and what that T stands for kind of differs depending on who you ask. But TCS, Tribal Monitor, use them interchangeably. But I'm responsible for training them and getting them on projects, the ones that are going to be important to us, that we want to have eyes and ears on, and then getting their field notes, their reports, getting the information from them about any concerns that they have, anything that they saw out there. Because world's a big place. Ancestral territory is a big place, and I can't be everywhere that I want to be. And so the same goes for the TIPO. So we have to delegate that out to people that we train to look for the things that we would be looking for.
Gotcha. So switching into Lakota worldviews and archaeology, like how do Lakota, and is that like the proper term that you guys refer to yourselves as, or do you guys go by refer to yourselves as something else?
Boy, that's some language politics that I don't feel qualified to get into too deeply. But in general, as far as I know, we all refer to ourselves as Lakota. And if people want to get real specific, they'll start referring to themselves by bands. So for me, I'm Sihasapa and Hochpapa Lakota, and then I'm also Ihanktawana Dakota. And that Dakota, Lakota, Isanti, Dakota, like those are all dialects. And that was how we've been delineated from like an outside perspective. And I'm sure internally at some point we had a different way to delineate ourselves, but mostly we've all fallen into this dialect structure of the language. And so we all just accept that at this point.
Fair
in
enough.
my experience. I shouldn't make broad statements like that.
No, of course, I totally get it. So how do your cultural values as a band, but also as an overall nation, shape archaeological practice?
So for me, it's a real deep-seated philosophy that I've had to that I both came into it with, and then I've also had to form as we go, especially because of the former TIPO for the tribe. His name was John Eagle Sr. He taught me a lot about what it is that we do, what it is that THPOs do. And so even now, I still rely heavily on the things that he taught me. But one of the things for us as Lakota people, particularly on Standing Rock, is the unique historical circumstances of our tribes with regard to treaties and who signed those treaties and who didn't sign those treaties. Because that's a really important piece from a historical standpoint and from the standpoint of the relationship to the U.S. federal government and how people constitute themselves or carry themselves. And so on Standing Rock, we don't have a lot of direct ties to the people who signed the 1858 or 1851 and 1868 Fort Laramie treaties. Those were primarily other bands. And so a lot of the folks on Standing Rock carry I'm trying to think of how to say it, title almost, but most of us are descendants of people that the federal government deemed as hostiles. And a lot of us carry that as a badge of honor to a point, less of a derogatory term, but more this is a legacy that I have to live up to. And it explains a lot about how we have been on the grand scale of things, I feel. But that's something that I have to like contend with whenever we're dealing with the federal agencies, whenever we're arguing with the Forest Service about allowing timber cutting or mining in the Black Hills, because deeply significant cultural area and something that our ancestors fought to protect. And now we have to carry that legacy. We have to carry on that fight, whether we wanted to or not. Like, that's kind of the hand we've been dealt.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's pretty heavy to be carrying around on the day to day. How are you involving, if at all, community members like youth and elders in archaeological work or tribal historic preservation?
So the monitor program is a really big way that we've been doing that outreach. I'm hoping to start doing more of it as we go forward. We've had a tumultuous couple of years and it doesn't seem like that's going to let up. And so I just have to figure out a way to keep moving forward. But that monitor program is a really big thing. And I'm creating a plan right now to, one of the big things that people come to my office for has to deal with cemeteries, all the cemeteries on the reservation. And they typically come around Memorial Day, around Veterans Day, and they want to know who's buried where. On Standing Rock, we have, they call it the Chief's Ride, and it's around Memorial Day. And it's horseback riders. They'll start at one end of the reservation and they'll work their way between all of the cemeteries where chiefs are buried, pay their respects, and then they'll end up on the other side. And then a lot of the veterans posts will go out and they'll clean up the graves and everything. And so people are always coming and asking us, where's so-and-so buried? Do you have maps of any of these graveyards? And I'm told that at some point we did, but that's been lost in the turnover and the shuffle and everything. And so what I want to do is go out with a lot of these community members, hear their stories of who's been laid to rest in these cemeteries, and have them show me where, if they remember. And then I'm also working with a couple of universities to hopefully come out and do some non-invasive surveys, ground penetrating radar, resistivity, to try and find some of these graves that are unmarked at this point. So I can at least, might not know who's in them, but I can at least tell people there's a burial here and we can do something to commemorate that. And that's going to be a lot of me having to involve the community, because those are the people that are going to have those memories.
Absolutely. I will let you know that me and my colleague, Dr. Blair Schneider over at the Kansas Geological Survey, have been doing free ground penetrating radar work for Prairie Band Potawatomi, and she doesn't charge at all for her services. So
you want to drive up to North
that sounds
South
like
Dakota?
A plan. Yeah, I could do it. That sounds great. I wouldn't mind that at all. But on that note, we're going to go ahead and take our first break. We'll be right back with Tyrel after these messages. And we're back with episode 21 with Tyrel Iron Eyes. And real quick, in the green room, me and Tyrel were talking between segments. We should probably mention the fact that Tyrel is a trained archaeologist and wasn't like the son of some tribal councilman that needed a job and just threw him in there, which does happen all across Indian country and in other environments. Tyrel, where did you go to school and what was your academic experience in the field?
Yeah, so before I answer that, I also realized that I neglected to mention my views are mine and not necessarily representative of my employer. These are my personal thoughts right now. But as for where I went to school, so I went to North Dakota State University for my undergrad and my graduate. I had a really unique relationship that I had built over with the faculty at NDSU over my time there as an undergrad. And I didn't really want to try and rebuild that somewhere else. And it was also important to me that I stay close to home. The whole reason I became an archaeologist stems from the Dakota Access Pipeline protests and my desire to want to help my people back home. And so I didn't want to leave. I didn't really want to travel too far for this. And then I wound up traveling for school regardless. Granted, that was for the field schools, which again, like the field school I went to was still hosted by NDSU, but it was also in partnership with the University of Wisconsin La Crosse and the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Red Cliff, their TIPO had a couple of projects, had a couple of things that they wanted archaeologists involved with. They had just bought some land that they turned into a tribal national park, and there was an area that they had questions about that could be answered archaeologically. And there's also, they call it the pageant grounds. And there was this big Indian pageant held there in the 1920s. And so they had a lot of oral history about it, but they wanted to know more about like the material culture, what was left behind, how much of the infrastructure that was built for the pageant was still around in some capacity. And so I got to do a lot of really cool stuff with that. And because of how involved the Red Cliff Tipo was, his name was Marvin Defoe. He also taught me a lot. We were camping with the community. We were spending a lot of time with the people of Red Cliff. We assisted with like their tribal monitor training. We had community members who would just filter through while we were digging and come ask us questions while we were cataloging. Like, it was a really good and really unique experience. I learned a lot there from Marvin. Again, I can't stress enough how much I've learned from the Tipos I've been fortunate enough to work with, but also Dr. John Kreese from NDSU and Dr. Heather Walder at UWL.
Sweet. That sounds phenomenal. So during the Standing Rock protests, were you still an undergrad, or was this after the protests?
So I was still an undergrad when the protest kicked off. I actually wasn't an archaeologist. I wasn't an anthropology major at that point either. Those protests kicked off and I was starting my third year of engineering. I was going into school to be a mechanical engineer. I had a really rocky start. You had mentioned that I was a photographer, and I bought my first camera a year before the protest kicked off. And it was the summer that I dropped out of school and didn't know what to do with my life and had no money. And I was like, yeah, this is the perfect time to buy an expensive camera, and made a really bad financial decision, but a really good personal decision in the grand scheme of things. But while I was away from NDSU, I also should have mentioned that I went to school at Sitting Bull College, our local tribal college. And that was where I had started toying with the idea of leaving engineering and going into native studies, going into anthropology, because I was taking a lot of chemistry classes, a lot of math classes, and I could learn the material, but I wasn't invested in it. I wasn't happy with it. And while I was at Sitting Bull College, I was taking Lakota language courses. I was taking classes on like traditional culture and traditional lifeways. And I was so much more interested in that. I was so much more invested in learning that. And that's what got me involved with our tribal language program. And then that in turn led me to get involved with THPO down the line. But it was my time with SBC that made me start thinking, maybe I don't want to be an engineer. And then I went back to NDSU right when everything started kicking off with the protest. And I still was thinking like more so along the lines of native studies. NDSU didn't have a native studies program, but they had anthropology. And I said, that's close enough. I can bootleg my way through this and twist it into what I need it to be. And then I just realized that I really liked anthropology as a concept. As a practice, I have some issues historically, and like we're working on them, but I really liked the idea of that. And I committed fully to the idea of anthropology and archaeology. And then I wound up getting an internship with the office in 2020 while everything was shut down for the pandemic. And that was my first right after my first semester of grad school. And so I wound up getting an internship. And then when the archaeologist before me left, he recommended that I apply for the position. And here I am.
Hell yeah. I got to say, it has been nice, like the past, I think like half decade, seeing more people our age as trained archaeologists coming into the field and being able to like commiserate and how goddamn awful this could be at times. And just being like, and also coming from the perspective of being cultural folks while also having the anthroarchaeology background. Like me, you, and Chance can just sit there and be like, this is going to be a fun meeting. We know these people aren't going to get along, and we have to play our sides of the field and like this, that, and the other thing. And it's like knowing the whole performance that
Yep.
some of these like intertribal communications take place in. And it's just fun.
Yeah, it's fun from like the tribal perspective. It's also really fun just from like, listening to other archaeologists that do more like traditional archaeology than I do. I was hanging out with some the other day and they were arguing about square tip shovels versus like normal spades for shovel tests. And they were going around the table all arguing in favor of their preferred shovel. And it came around to me and I was just like, I don't have a dog in this race. I was like, I don't shovel. If my shovel touches the ground, things have gone horribly awry and no one is happy. And so they're all just nodded. Huh, yeah, I guess that makes sense, huh?
Sure enough. Talking about like other archaeologists, what is it like, or in your experience, how have, or if at all, non-American Indian entities like built respectful partnerships with Standing Rock or Cheyenne River or Pine Ridge, any of the various Lakota nations, such as like archaeology firms, CRM firms, and universities?
So I feel like I've answered every single question starting with, and that's just going to be what's going to be. But in large part, it's that willingness for them to accept that there's these historical wrongs that are coloring our interactions today. And that while they might not have played a part in that, while they might not have been the perpetrators, they accept that they have to bear what that is and the negative feelings and be willing to work through that. A lot of the negative relationships come from people who recognize or can at least acknowledge that there were negative interactions, that there's this negative history, but refuse to take any of that on to try and rectify it, to try and make amends moving forward. Where like the good relationships are people who are like, yeah, there's been bad blood. There's been really bad calls made in the past. You guys have been hurt by this field. You've been hurt by the federal government. You've been hurt by all these various things. How can we fix that? How can we move forward? How can we respect your voice, your sovereignty, your autonomy? And so with the Forest Service, I think this predates me, but I think we were given an award from the forest, like the National Forest Service office, for an agreement that my office had worked out with one of the local forests here. I guess it would have been the grasslands. We don't have forests on the prairie. But,
brother, keep them trees down.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a whole other thing. I get claustrophobic in the woods.
Dude,
but
we were talking with Menominees at some point for the Kansas thing, and they kept going on and on about trees. And me and Pat were like, we don't want a single tree in sight. If there's a single tree on the prairie, things have gone horribly awry, and we feel incredibly claustrophobic. And they were just like, but the trees, and we're just like, no.
When I was doing the field school in Wisconsin, I got teased a lot because I got claustrophobic down there, and community members would pop out from behind trees. And every single time I was like, I don't like how close you got to me, and without me knowing. And they would just look at me and be like, you afraid, little Sioux boy? And I was like, it's always so funny to me, but I'm like, please be gone. But going back to the Forest Service, like they kept coming to us, even whenever it would end in a disagreement and John would leave the room, they never let it stop there. Like they kept coming back and saying, all right, we disagreed this last time. Here's a new draft. And then they just kept building this relationship. And it wasn't so much that they wouldn't take no for an answer. It was that it took the specific disagreements we had for them to realize like how to move forward. And we created a really good agreement. And that was actually how I wound up getting my internship with the office. Was the Forest Service agreed to pay for a data tech intern with THPO in order to facilitate some Forest Service projects. And it became this whole thing. And so that was how I got my start with specifically Standing Rock THPO. And then like I've been able to build relationships like that with NDSU primarily because I was there and they've all listened to me rant and rave for the last 10 years, but also with Minnesota State University Moorhead. They've come out and helped me with some geotechnical stuff, and they've used it to their benefit as well, where they can bring students out and their students get to do a project that has a tangible benefit that they can see, and they get to interact with a tribal community in it's not a controlled environment, but it's at least a lower stakes than if they just show up one day and have to try and navigate that on their own. Cause that's always a wild time.
Fair enough, man. Thoughts? I'm going to have 3 quick ones for you. Is there an importance of Native people doing this work, or doing Indigenous archaeology? What are your hopes for Lakota historic preservation? And then finally, any advice for Native youth and non-Native archaeologists?
The importance of Native people doing archaeology. It's what I said kind of pretty much off rip at the very top. For so long, our own narratives haven't been in the hands of Native people. Like, they haven't been told with the voices of tribal people. And every Native archaeologist that gets to take that mantle, that gets to step into this field, that puts pen to paper, that puts words on a page, we're reclaiming that narrative. We're telling our own stories. And it's not the first time that it's happened, but it's the first time that we've had we've had this level of control over our own history. And so we're able to correct a lot of these misconceptions and a lot of these just like outright falsehoods about us. I've been told that Lakota people were never in Colorado, that we never crossed through certain parts of Wyoming. And I'm like, I don't know, man. There's only so many ways you can get to Fort Laramie from here. And I assume I have to cross through there at some point. Like, there's a reason that we're here.
Yeah, you guys burnt down forts in northeastern Colorado after Sand Creek.
Yeah. And so again, like, it's so many of these really weird ideas that have popped up. And I've been told that we're rewriting history whenever we assert our claim to a territory that we've always had claim to. I'm like, if you look at the history that is already written, we're here. Just because we're inconvenient to you now doesn't mean that it's a falsehood that we're peddling. But every time that there's a Native archaeologist, that we're able to, again, really protect our place at the table, really protect our ability to provide this input and to tell our own story.
Dude, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and chatting about your job and just what it is you do, tribal archaeologist, and giving a Lakota voice to this podcast. Yeah, man, anything you'd like to say to the audience before we wrap up?
Not particularly. Just, I appreciate you for listening. And if you take nothing else away from this, I just ask that you go about building relationships in a good way, that you go about doing the work that you do in a good way.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. Until 2 weeks from now, we'll be back. And I believe next on the docket is, I think it's Matt Reed, possibly Chance Ward. There'll be another Native Art Tipo person to chat with. Awesome. Thanks so much, Tyrel. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Great Plains Archaeology Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Pawnee_archaeologist, and you can also email me at greatplainsarchpodcast@gmail.com. And remember, anybody can love the mountains, but it takes a soul to love the prairie. American author Willa Cather.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.